What is happening, everybody? Welcome back to episode 409 of The O Show, presented by Mayweather Boxing and Fitness in Scottsdale, Arizona. Mayweather Boxing and Fitness is an inclusive, high-intensity fitness experience developed by the champ, Floyd Money Mayweather himself. Grand opening is approaching. No official date as of right now in the heart of Scottsdale, but VIP week is among us here for Mayweather Boxing and Fitness. We are also sponsored by betonline.ag. You can sign up for that 50% bonus at betonline.ag with week 3 of the NFL coming your way starting tomorrow for Thursday Night Football. And on episode 409 of the podcast, we have the host of the TRENDIFIER podcast streaming live from South New Jersey, my home state, the Garden State, Julian Dorey. Thanks so much for coming on, man.
What's going on, Jack? Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
And again, I'm excited to talk to you because I feel like we are in the same boat of, two young kids who started their own shows, their own platforms, wanting to learn from other people by just sharing stories and creating good content for people to see. And then there's other people among us. A mutual friend of ours is Taylor Ringgold, who you had on,
Right.
from New York. He just had his first radio show at 2 a.m. for WFAN, The Fan in New York City, which is really cool. And it's really cool to be connected to a bunch of people that are driven in the same capacity and the same mindset as one another.
Agreed, man. And Taylor's a guy I met 2.5, 3 years ago when we were grinding something in New York City, just doing an event on a whim on a weekend. He was working it. Our team was working it with something separate. And, you try to find the people who are out there and kind of want it. And yeah. He was definitely one of those guys. So it's good to get connected within his network. So
it's awesome to see everybody succeeding too. The ones that are truly in this for the long haul because we want nothing else. I know for me, I started this when I was in the early years in college. Maybe after my freshman year in college, I started this podcast in just my basement bar room with a TV, making a nice looking studio, you could say. And it's gotten to a point where we're able to now use Dave Pratt's studios, which I'm grateful for, have, a great audio team with Hanko and Zach and Robin here doing audio. And it's fun to see things grow. And this is the main reason why we do this. And I kind of wanted to pick your brain about how you got into starting the TRENDIFIER because you were, I want to say, not happy doing your job. You were working for Merrill Lynch, right, in finance, and just decided that it wasn't for you? Or how did that all go about?
It's not a short story, if that's okay. But yeah, it was a long process to even get to that point. And I respect the guys like you who kind of knew what you wanted earlier on and went after it because goddamn, is that an advantage? I think there's a time you get to after you start your career where you start to realize that, okay, I assumed I didn't know too much, but I knew absolutely nothing. And I got to that point probably about 2 years in, and I was working in Merrill, as you said, and I was what's called a private banker. So we worked with ultra high net worth individuals and then companies on some things. So it could be on the company side, it could be something as basic as a 401k, if it was a really big one, or a 10b5-1, like an SEC plan or something like that. And then the individual side, it was all right, we're the quarterback of your financial life. And my boss, who I worked for, and our team, we did, the average net worth was 60, 70 million. We had a lot of clients up towards a B. So you're dealing with people who have kind of shaped society in a way, and you're dealing with pretty high stakes, which is cool. But the work itself is at a bank, and there's a lot of rules at banks. And there's a lot of rules that have been put in there because a few people took advantage of systems and screwed over a lot of people. And so, I started to find that there was more of a question around us all the time of, how can we not do business versus how can we do business? And that was a huge, huge red flag for me. And so I just found myself getting more and more pissed off. And I was also then starting to realize that I had kind of a creative gene, which I never recognized, which was really dumb. When I look at some of the stuff I was interested in growing up, of course, that's what I had, but I just never realized it. And so I started working on some side LLCs. And it was nothing crazy, but it was enough to get me excited about some things.
You had control over your own stuff.
Sure. But it's not like it was going anywhere. Which by the way, I forgot to ask before, like how language wise, what's the stipulations here? I don't want to.
You can say whatever the fuck you want.
All right, beautiful. All right, just making sure because anyway, should have asked that ahead of time. My bad. But yeah, so I was. Wait, where was I? I'm sorry.
You were discussing, your job not being happy there because you didn't really have control over anything.
And the LLCs.
Doing your own stuff with the LLCs.
So,
I got you.
Yeah, I mean, you're controlling your own stuff with that, but you're not, like, these weren't major businesses going anywhere, if that makes sense. So in that business, in the finance game, the part of it that I was in, because there's a lot of different aspects of it, it's pretty much you come out of college, you grind like a dog for 3 to 4 years, and if you actually make it, you get the offer. And so I was fortunate enough to get to the offer, worked for a guy I love, and he gave me the offer, and that was my holy shit moment. I was like, okay, I can't do this. Like, because if I said yes to that, like, I'm committing. Technically, I could leave 6 months later, but like, I would never do that to him. And I told him that. And I'm like, that's a sign that, like, I don't like this. I'm not going to do it. I like you. That's not a reason to be at the job. And he was like, obviously, So I started trying to figure out how to shift industries, wanted to get towards something in marketing. And this is like 2019, late 2019. And so then the pandemic, obviously we didn't know that was coming, but I had been doing some media work on the side through some of my LLCs. And I did an event in January 2020. And a bunch of people afterwards were saying, bro, you need a podcast. And I'd heard that a bunch before, but I was like, what the fuck am I going to do with a podcast? Like, no. But these people, they were saying it over and over and over. And I guess I was at enough of a crossroads that I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'll just start researching like things I got to put in equipment wise, because I didn't know anything about this stuff. Any of our media work, I always had a producer. I knew what it was because they told me what to do, So I just kind of started looking into it on the side. And January throughout February, it was like this hobby at night and on the weekends while I was also trying to shift my career. And then the pandemic hit, and I had totally forgotten that a week before the first day of quarantine, I had actually ordered everything. And so it all got there on the first day. And I was looking at the equipment and I'm like, what the fuck am I going to do with a podcast? Because I didn't even remember it was coming because the whole world was upside down. And then I was like, you know what? That's kind of a sign. And so I just started researching and building, and then I launched in September 2020. But I guess the long-winded way of getting to it is that there wasn't like this long-term plan or anything I had in mind. I just kind of fell into it. And once I fell into it, I had to roll with it. And I really don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just trying to make great content. And it's similar to what you said up front. It's just, I'm talking with people. We're doing long form.
Yeah.
High cut conversations as far as like it's going to go wherever it goes. I have no idea anytime, and then see if something great happens. And once in a while, something pretty special has come out of the guest who's come in, whoever that is. And that's just a really cool thing. So I'm doing everything I can, but that's where I'm at.
It took me a good 150, 200 episodes or so to really get going with mine. Like the first 50 episodes I ever did were either with my brother in our basement, or I talked to myself and just gave my own, pissant takes and opinions on life stuff that maybe like my parents were going to listen to, right? It's a grind. It's not one straight arrow either. It's a slippery slope to get to where you want to be. But you just said it right there, like you have conversations with people, which leads to things that you didn't think you were going to learn that day or talk about that day for any matter. And, because I listened to the one, don't know his name, but the guest you had on about him being by the World Trade Center for 9/11 and what he experienced.
Oh, Jim.
Yeah. I mean, talk a little bit about that, because that story alone, like you probably weren't going into that conversation thinking like, oh my God, like I'm going to learn something pretty badass today. Because you hear those 9/11 stories all the time of someone, sleeping in that day. They were supposed to be at work at 9:30, but they went to the Jets game the night before. I use that example because I actually knew a guy who went to a Jets game the night before that happened. But, you hear all those crazy 9/11 stories, kind of, just to talk about your show and the Trendifier and what you guys talk about, kind of explain, that story a little bit. Because I thought that was one of the more intriguing stories that you had on the show.
Yeah, Jim is dynamite. And there's a reason why. I think I've had a few that are seemingly towards the top, and he's definitely top 3 guests I've had as far as what the audience has liked. And that's not a surprise to me because number 1, he's an unbelievable storyteller. And number 2, his resume is insane. I mean, he's one of those guys that you never heard about, and there's a reason you never heard about it. And then I just happen to have a really good relationship with him, which is really cool. And he agreed to come on and do this. But yeah, so little background before I get to that story. He was West Point, 86, was an Army Ranger after that, was over in Somalia with all that stuff, did, I don't know, maybe like 7, 8 years active as an Army Ranger, came back to America, went straight into the FBI. He did, I think it was like 10 or 11 years total of undercover work. That was insane. That stuff he can't talk about publicly, obviously. And then the other 15 years with the FBI, he was a special agent in charge with a specialty in interrogation. So he was one of the guys, one of the handful of guys they would send around the world to take care of things, if you know what I mean. And one of those things, like a pop culture example, was he was the guy that walked on the boat and told the pirates to get the fuck off and told Captain Phillips he could have it back. He was also in the Middle East questioning some of the major terrorists and that stuff that was going down there at a couple different points, but never really talked to him deeply about that. So I'm going to bookmark that and do that again. But when it came to the story you're referring to about 9/11, 9/11 is actually something that is unbelievably personal to him because he was an FBI agent based out of the New York City area, working in those various offices when he wasn't undercover. He was working out of there, and he was in the city that day. And also, he's actually married to a 9/11 widow, which not like he knew that at the time, but pretty another wild twist of the story there. But he was in the city, and I believe it was the Newark, New Jersey State Police Maritime Unit, along with the Coast Guard. And then I don't know if he mentioned this in the podcast, but I think it was also in concert with the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, were meeting that morning to discuss how they would respond if a catastrophe were to occur in New York City. And the terrifying irony of that is that one of the stories that has come out in the years since 9/11 that I think a lot of people still don't know, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but have you happened to see a recent documentary? I think Vice did it. It was like earlier this year where they were talking about the boats and 9/11.
Yeah, I've actually watched 3 different documentaries. There's one on Netflix, there was one on HBO, and then there was that one.
Yeah, so that one described what happened that day, which is, the world's ending. These buildings are like coming down, and they're on fire for a long time, for 102 minutes, then they're coming down. And all these boats, these ferries, and then just straight up regular boatsmen from New York and New Jersey, and then the Coast Guard and some of the major agencies who could get involved started just shipping into South Manhattan and evacuating people from the city. So if you talk to people who were in the city that day, I think the majority of them got out via boat. And so it was just unbelievably scary and like ironic to me that he was meeting with all these boat levels of the agencies to discuss what they would do in this kind of thing. And then a few hours later it happened. But he talked about how when it first hit, he was like down on Church Street, which if anyone's familiar with Manhattan, that's like right there where the World Trade Center is. He was like moving people behind cars. A few Secret Service agents were there as well because their office is like right there, and he knew all those guys. They just happened to literally be there. It was just so bizarre that, because it's Manhattan and there's a lot of important different government offices and regular business offices that work there, all these different important people happen to be down in the area, some of them actually in the building while this is going on, and it's just chaos. And to hear him describe that and then describe how the second plane like went right over his head, it's just, I mean, to me, it's surreal. I don't know. How old were you when 9/11 happened?
I was 2.5, 3 years old. Okay. And crazy enough, I do remember the day. I don't remember the event. I remember what I had done that day. It was my first day of preschool. And I remember being there for, again, 3 years old, but probably felt like 5 minutes. My teacher crying hysterically, holding me in my arms, handing me off to my dad, who took me home. And I remember telling my mom that one day a few years ago, and she's like, that was 9/11.
Oh, oh my God.
And those had to be your formative years,
the teacher's husband?
Yeah.
Ugh.
That was the only day I attended that preschool, too.
It's one of those. So I was, I guess, like 4 or 5 years older than you. And it's one of those things that each year that goes by, it gets more and more monumental in my life, like as a moment, because there's something so surreal about watching planes hit a building. Like, it sounds stupid to this day. Like, I will watch the video and it still sounds stupid. Like, these planes hit a building. And it also just was this, it was this precursor. It was this ripple effect event. You know, you look at our history. You said you watched the Netflix documentary. I'm sure someone said this in there. I watched some of that. But anyone would say this. It's like you look at the history of the world, but especially the United States, there's pre 9/11 and there's post 9/11. Mm-hmm. And it's because of everything that happened afterwards, and to see how that was all catalyzed and how it was, you know, a bunch of people in suits going to work. It wasn't like this war army event or something, like, you know what I mean? It was just this wild, sick, sad, twisted, sadistic day. And it changed everything. But yeah, it's one of those things where if you were old enough, and it's crazy that you were 2.5 or 3 years old and you remember that, but I would say it's like one of my first real vivid memories that I can point back to, and I'll never forget that.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, like, for me, like, I remembered an event that happened to be on the day, you know? Like, you were, what, 8, 9, 10 years old around that time?
I was like 7.
7, so close. But what were you doing that day? Do you remember vividly? Because you said that was one of the first things that you'd really remember if you could dig deep into your childhood. Do you remember exactly where you were?
Yeah, I went to school in South Jersey, and, you know, it's about an hour 45 outside New York City. So there were a lot fewer people in South Jersey who were directly affected by, like, husband, wife, or mom, dad, but there were still some. There's still some. Kid from my town died. Another guy from a town over, her husband, who commuted in every day, died. So there were still some, but there's also a lot of people who have family right there in New York. And then, you know, they lost extended family in the buildings, or their family, lucky enough, got out. But I remember being in class and then suddenly seeing all the teachers who had family in Lower Manhattan. And it was like, I think it was like 5 or 6 of them, like right on that hallway right there of different grades. And they were like crying on the phones, checking that everyone's okay. And my one teacher, who was an awesome teacher, she just had this really serious look on her face, but she wasn't like a deer in a headlight at all. But there was definitely the idea that, like, holy shit, how the hell am I going to tell a bunch of 7-year-olds about this? You know, because they weren't going to let out school early. We were far south enough that we weren't going to do that. But she's like, all right, people see people crying out in the hallways. I'm going to show them the TV too. And I don't even remember what she said, but she just kind of delivered like, hey, these buildings got hit. Some bad people did it. It's some sort of foreign force that doesn't seem to like America at all. And we're going to hear from the president tonight about it. And you should check with, if anyone has family in New York. This was early days of cell phones, but she's like, you can use my phone. You can call your parents. Let's check on them. If you need to leave, no problem. And it was just like, okay, because you're processing it, but you're not processing it. It's not like, I don't think the gravity of it can hit you fully when you're that age. I think you probably have to be like 11, 12 years old to really be like, oh my God, I know what this is. But still, there's something, you know, I remember my mom picking me up, and I remember the TV being on at home and Wolf Blitzer reporting on the whole thing. And, you know, there's just images and everyone's just in shock. Your parents are in shock, so now you're in shock. And then you start to realize, like, okay, something really terrible has happened.
And then just by, you know, reminiscing about this right now, you know, you had an experience at 7. I had an event that I remembered when I was 3. And you're talking to him in this interview about him literally discussing with his team like what could happen and what we need to do if something like this were to happen, and it happens just a few hours later. I mean, it's crazy to think about, you know, the types of things that you could not just experience, but talk about and go down that route of things that you didn't necessarily know that you were going to discuss. And have you felt that way with other guests that you've had on the Trendifier? Like that, like you said, like that's top 3 guests right there that people look at and be like, that was a great ass interview, man. What other interviews do you kind of, I don't want to say pride yourself on, but like interviews you look at and be like, that was really good and this is why I continue to do this?
Every guest, there's been a moment like that. Every single one.
Which is an amazing feeling.
There's people say things that I'm just like, whoa, and they go places with ideas. Like, you know, we're trained in this world right now that has everyone, you're either here or you're here. As politics is in everything. It's not just like who you vote for or whatever. And we're led to believe based on the extremes we see online that that's what it is. And you start to realize that people are really fucking complicated. And the last people you would ever think are going to think one thing are going to say it. And then you're like, oh. And so I don't know what episode it was, but somewhere along the way, I just stopped even thinking about assuming anything about someone before they came in. And so it's just a very blank slate, and I see what happens. But they're all special in their own way. I've been lucky. I haven't had a bad guest yet. Everyone's been good. There's been some who have been phenomenal, I would say, who probably rise above the rest. But there's different episodes for different reasons. I know I can kind of go off some that have been really affected when people have seen it on TikTok and then end up watching the episode or listening to the episode. So another one like that was definitely Ashton Larold, because first of all, he's a musician who I was a fan of. I've known him for a couple years as far as like his music, like listening to it, and someone reached out and they're like, hey, would you want to talk to Ashton? I was like, hell yeah. But he's got an unbelievable way of just describing things. Like he's a wordsmith, which I love because I'm a writer by trade, and that kind of stuff is just, I could talk with that all day. And so when he came on, I'm thinking, you know, all right, we'll probably talk about music a lot, you know, some thoughts around what he's thinking there. And then boom, I mean, half hour in starts going hard towards mental health. And I didn't know any of this stuff as far as like his experiences, and he started talking about his days where he was, you know, suicidal and all that. And it was a long period. It wasn't like, you know, he was feeling bad one day and saying, oh, you know, I might've been suicidal. I was like, no, like he was. And there was all kinds of shit that went around that. His childhood was very interesting, because he had a great relationship with his parents and everything. And it wasn't like that was an issue. It was just like kind of some demons in his head. And I remember when he started talking about that, it got to one point where I was like, oh, okay, this is different. There's just kind of a feeling you get, and you're like, some people who have no idea who the fuck this is are going to hear this guy and they're going to be inspired by it. And when that happens, I've been pretty good at just completely ignoring that and continuing to roll with it and letting it happen. And that needs to continue to be the case, because if I had to start thinking about, well, this sounds like it's going to be good content, this thing's over. And I don't do that, because I don't think I can. I mean, there's too much going on. But that one was definitely special for that reason. And then I don't know, it's really hard to say. There's so many different types of people and subject matters that come up. You know, I try to cut up the content as best I can on TikTok, and you know, there's plenty of evergreen things I can take from every episode. So I'll still go reach back in the bag for an episode I did almost a year ago. But when I do it, almost every time I learn something new that I forgot about or that I didn't fully understand the first time around. And so I don't know, there's just a lot of different great perspectives that have been flying around. I mean, I'm sure you can understand that, you know, talking with all the different people you do. It's not any one way or any one way of doing it or thinking about it. People just kind of, once the guard comes down, it's like, all right, we're off to the races.
Well, let me ask you this thing, because, you know, we started this episode off with, you know, you saying that behind these doors, when the doors are shut, you have no idea what's going to come out of that person's mouth, or, you know, the stories that are going to be shared, or even, personal struggles, like you just mentioned with that one guest who's a musician. And it's crazy to see people open up in front of a microphone with someone that maybe, they barely know, like I've had mental health conversations with other mental health coaches on here, opening up about things that I probably wouldn't even tell my mom 10 years ago, like she's been trying to pull that shit out of me forever. And I'm telling some random guest, like, what do you think makes it so different, having a quote unquote platform and sharing, personal life adventures and stories and struggles and, anything in any which way? Like, what do you think makes it different, like a different type of atmosphere to come out and share those things and have a real conversation with someone on a platform?
I think it's the intimate nature of the process. And it's why, and I've had to sacrifice some volume for this, but I'm going to bet on it long term. And it's the way I knew I had to go because of my timeline with things and just putting all the chips in this and not doing anything else. But I own the Zoom app if I have to open it up and someone else Zooms me. I don't do anything that's not in person because I think that is a huge part of it. Now, it helps when you're on it and guys like you and me who have a full setup, professional microphones, headphones, like that's better than the regular Zoom, no doubt about it. But I'm sure you can even attest to it with guests you have on where they don't have that set up and there's delays. I mean, there's even delays when we do this a little bit. When someone is sitting right across from you and the doors are shut and the lights are out and no one even knows the time exists, weird shit happens. And I often say that I think that if you mandated that divorcing couples had to be locked in a room like this with headphones in and talk until they're done, divorce lawyers would be out of business. I don't think they would have a business if you said the door's locked, you're going to be in there for 12 hours, knock it out. Like that's how it would go, because it is highly personal. And the second layer to it is I spent my entire career, a big part of what I did that I made like the main part was getting to know people and talking with them. And when you're working in finance, especially with people's money, most of the people you talk to, you're never going to do business with, which I'm glad I didn't know that going in, because I just, you're out there and you're quote unquote networking. And I try to avoid using that word because I really hate it. It has the wrong connotations, I think, now because people overuse it. But I just would get people's stories and I'd fuck with them. I'd be like, all right, this is someone I enjoy. I like spending time around them. I don't care if we're going to do business or not. They're up to interesting shit. And that's someone I can talk to now and someone that I can develop a genuine friendship with. And so in doing that, I had to talk with people across the spectrum of every background and even age. And I started to realize, all right, I think I'm pretty good at that. I think that's probably a talent, whether it was totally built from the years of doing that or some of it's innate. I don't know, but that's pretty much what I do now. And I just do it with a little more personal touch to it. And you're forced to talk to me.
Right.
So it's not really any different.
So you knew right off the bat when you started the Trendifier that you were going to have this conversational show talking about whatever it is you're going to talk about. Like you knew going in, there's your logo right there, that it wasn't going to be this Q&A based thing where you're just like, wow, that's interesting. On to my next topic. Because that was my problem starting off. Like you mentioned, like having, the advantage of knowing what I wanted young. I also had the disadvantage of not knowing how to do it at all and learning through my own failures and mistakes. Where I feel like when you started your show, you knew exactly what you were going to do with it. Not necessarily know exactly what you were going to do with it, but you knew how to have conversations with people on a show. You knew, your platform.
At the very beginning, I had to do the solo route when I was building it to release it. Because I had to show people like, all right, I got a studio, like it's legit, whatever. And I'm thinking, oh, fuck. I'm going to have to do like 30 of these before someone wants to come in. And I was just dreading it because, first of all, and you said you did it for a while.
Yeah.
For people that haven't done that, I don't know if they do it like I did, but I had the pressure of no cuts. Like, do it, right? Yep. You do it straight through. I'm a one take guy. This multi-take bullshit, I hate that. So it is the fucking hardest thing to do. Go talk to yourself for an hour. Tell me how it goes. It's not like it wasn't that fun. It was more. Some of the fun was like figuring out some different things that worked and things I could do. But I'm like, the sooner I can get someone in here so that I don't just have to listen to myself and someone else can share some other ideas, the better. And then it happened pretty quick because I launched with 10 episodes. I did get 2 people to talk with me in those 10. So 2 of them were with people. And I was filming the next 4 right there that had already been outlined. And so once I did those, I started lining them up and I slid right into that guest thing. I said, all right, done with the solos. Let's just talk with people. But as far as the content goes and the style, my style has always been that, you know, horrible, terrible 2-cent word authenticity. Usually when people say the word, and I'm being a huge hypocrite right now saying it, but fuck it, we'll do it. When people say the word authenticity out loud, that's usually one of the more inauthentic people you'll ever meet. For me, it kind of hurt me because, you know, I'm a rebel. I like rules that make sense. You tell me not to kill somebody, that's a good rule. I think that's a great rule. I'm going to follow that one. You tell me that, like, I'm not allowed to text a client because it's not on email and it's the year 2020. All right, that's not a good rule. I think I'm going to break that one. And that's just like an example from the bank. But in my life, I've always operated like people like me for being me. And I'm, you know, there's good with that. I'm sure there's bad with that. I can think of a few things, but it's just me. And so I'm like, okay, well, what works? And I'd become a fan of Rogan, who's got the biggest podcast in the world, in like 2018. And I remember thinking to myself, you know, it was very cool that I liked him because usually when you gravitate towards people you like in like pop culture, it's someone you see a ton of things in common with, like interest-wise. And this guy had such a wide range of things that were outside my purview or like that I would never look at. And then I enjoyed him. And I was like, that's interesting. Why is that? And I started to realize, I'm like, because he just fucking rolls camera. And then you hear him talk about it a little bit. And like at the beginning, people were like, what are you doing? He's like, I don't know. I'm just going to roll it. And he did. And he just kept doing it. And it's because he was good at this one thing. And it blew my mind that, like, I can't speak to it with him at Spotify exclusively now and what that's done to numbers. But pre-Spotify, he was the #1 show in the world. And I don't think like the 2 or 3 shows behind him combined even had his full audience. So when you look at things that work in culture, everyone tries to copy the thing that does.
Oh, yeah.
This was such an outlier because you can't. You can't copy being someone for 3 hours. It's not possible. Like this isn't Oprah and no disrespect to Oprah. Love Oprah. She did a phenomenal job for years. But it's not like that. All right, here's the questions we're going to hit. It's going to be like a 10-minute segment. Like that you can copy. And you're probably not going to be nearly as good as Oprah, but you can do a knockoff. You can't do a knockoff of Joe Rogan. You can't change what his experiences are to be your own. You can't change who you are to be like him. You can't talk like him. You can't have little tics like him. So I'm like, that's why there's nothing like him out there. Then I took it a layer lower and I was like, but why aren't other people trying to be their own form of that? Like, why aren't other people doing like long form podcasts, talking with a bunch of people and really getting to the bottom of things and just, you know, rolling with it? And I looked at the list and I'm like, the people who are kind of doing that are like Russell Brand and Dax Shepard, who do a phenomenal job. They're a little less long form sometimes than he is, but you know, they were actors first, great actors, and now they're really great podcasters too. I'm like, all right, that's kind of different. And then I'm like, the only other people doing it are people in his tree. You know, he's like his scientist friends and his comedian friends. And they're either scientists or they're comedians. There's no middle ground. Like they're either you are thinking the whole time or you're laughing the whole time. I'm like, okay, no one is doing it where it can kind of just be both sometimes. And I'm like, isn't that what normal conversations like with people who are personable? It's kind of both. Like you can talk about deep shit, you can talk about light shit, and it's all part of the same thing. I'm like, this is not complicated. So I'm like, all right, well, I guess that's just what I'll do. And I'll see, I'll just have to talk about me, which was like a whole weird thing. Like, as far as, it's not like talking about yourself. It's more like, when you're talking with people for that long, pretty much anything that's going on in your mind, it's going to come out, whether explicitly or implicitly.
Yeah.
So it's like, you got to be okay with having that out there publicly. And I think I just jumped into it and never thought about it, because normally that kind of shit would horrify me. I was always the guy who wanted to have a career behind closed doors and no one knew who I was. So this is like a nightmare. But I guess like time and circumstance, I was just like not paying attention to it. And so now it is what it is. But it's still like even weird. At least I get to be in a studio, like away from stuff. But it's even like crazy to me, like when people reach out and they're like fans. I'm like, oh my God,
right.
Like, I'm terrible. What are you doing? But, they resonate with it because it's like they're sitting at the table here. It's not. There's no.
You never really know what people are going to resonate with, right? Because you think you suck, but there's people out there that are inspired by what you're saying and what you're putting out there. Rogan probably thought forever that he sucked. Like all of these guys. Dave Portnoy probably thought he sucked. Guy's taken over the entire sports media biz.
He's amazing.
And I think it's different for everybody. Everybody finds themselves at one point or another, that you need to be yourself to be successful. I know I need to be myself. Rogan knows that he needs to be himself. There's people out there that are inspired by the Rogans and the Portnoys and, actors, musicians, whatever it is. And they want to be like them because they haven't quite found what's going to make them them yet. They need to be inspired by something else in order to keep going. Whether they find that out at 17, 27, or 50, that I feel is very important to figure out at some point in your life, because if you don't, you're just going to be a relic of somebody else, trying to be like someone else. There's a ton of people who want to be journalists just like Barstool Sports. You probably see that being in Jersey all the time. Everybody wants to be the next Barstool Sports personality. And I was sick of that growing up.
That's a perfect example, by the way, what you just said.
See, and I knew you'd understand it because we're from the same neck of the woods. I have friends who just want to be that raunchy personality. You can't duplicate what they did. It's been done already. You have to be yourself. It's gonna be a long ass journey. It's gonna take forever. You might not ever find it, but if you do, it's gonna be, again, using that word authentic. It's gonna be you, and nobody can replicate you.
Here's the thing: you can't replicate it, but you can follow. That's a model you can actually follow. That was the point. I didn't say that well enough, but like with Rogan, there's no model you can follow other than I'm going to talk with someone for a long time. That's it. There's no, you can't do any, what are you going to sit there and try to talk like him? With Barstool, yes, there are people who do that knockoff shit, and you can tell they're literally like trying to be KFC or trying to be Portnoy, and it doesn't work. But the people who who are willing to be in a saturated market and sit there and just create for a while and have no one care and just keep going and do it with a genuine personality, but follow the same kind of all right, we're gonna have a rundown, we're gonna have we're gonna have the 2-minute drill or whatever and stuff like that. Yeah, a select few of talented people can pull that off, and that's what I was trying to say. Where there are some things where you can follow a model. You can't totally be like, I'm going to be the same exact thing, but you can pick out all right, I'm going to do these 5 things. These are the types of pieces of content I'm going to put out, and that's it. And that's the weird thing about doing it the way I'm doing it, because it's hard to say all right, does this work or doesn't it? Because there's not really a ton of precedent out there. I just don't know why there isn't, because I feel like more people should have seized on this and said, you know what? You are just you're selling yourself and your ability to have a conversation. That's it. That's it.
What are you doing next weekend in Jersey? Out of curiosity.
Next weekend in Jersey.
Check your schedule. Not to invite myself, but since I'm going to be there, I'd love to check out your setup and talk more about this.
Yeah, man, absolutely.
We do got to wrap up here shortly in a few seconds, but I'd love to, again, come on the Trendifier, your platform and your space, and again, have a conversation like this, because this is the stuff I love talking about, man. That right there is the prime example of someone who knows what they're talking about in their true self, which is something I would definitely love to not only pick your brain about more, but again, see what makes you tick in your own environment and being back home. It'll be very interesting and very cool to see what you're doing on your side. And again, you could find the Trendifier not only on YouTube, but you got your Instagram. Where can we find you?
It seems like most people are Apple and Spotify.
Oh, yeah.
my TikTok is at Trendifier, TRENDIFIER. And then I find that pretty much all the consumption comes from Apple and Spotify. Everything is available on YouTube, but YouTube is way behind those other two. So if people prefer the audio, that's good with me. Wherever people want to get it, I'm down.
Well, the Trendifier with Julian Dorey available now. Thanks so much, man. Hopefully we can connect next weekend. This was episode 409. We're presented by Mayweather Boxing and Fitness. Hanko, hit the close.
Thanks for having me, man.